Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you are well on this fine morning. You may already be getting started. You may just be getting started. But in any case, I'm happy you're here. If you're just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom, a nana, a partner. I am a runner, a jazzerciser, and usually when you see me, I'm either coming from a workout or going to a workout. But you get me pre-workout, so I'm not sweaty yet. I am a grad student studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, a wellness advocate, an online boutique owner, so many things that I'm so proud of, a best-selling author. But mostly what I'm proud of is that I've had an incredible, and by incredible I mean crazy, educational, inspirational journey toward wellness through my anxiety and depression. And I have learned over time that sharing my journey with others and inviting others to share their journey with me helps us both, because we learn tips and tricks from each other. And just like peer wisdom and peer support groups, it can be very, very beneficial and help you feel like you are not alone in your journey. So here we are. This is episode 77 of Wellness Wednesday. And if you're here, let me know you're here. If you don't see this till afterwards, drop a comment or a question or shoot me a message and let me know that you saw it. Sometimes Facebook doesn't show me all the things. So if I see you pop up, if I see you ask a question or make a comment, I will respond. But sometimes Facebook just doesn't show me. So if you don't hear from me or you're on here listening and I don't give you a shout out or respond to your question or comment, it's because Facebook didn't show me, and I will definitely do so afterwards. So I hope if you do follow Wellness Wednesday, I hope you enjoyed last week's video on spring cleaning. If you didn't see it, it wasn't just about physical spring cleaning. It was about what it can do for our mental health. Let me know, and I will be happy to tag you in that video or drop the video link in the comments below so that you can check out last week's video. As always, if you want to check out any of the videos, if you're just stumbling on my page, you can go to the videos tab on my Facebook page, and they are all there for you to take a peruse through, take a look at, whatever. So today we're going to talk about two important words, and this kind of came up for me during last week's video. Sometimes one Wellness Wednesday kind of leads to the other. They kind of build on each other, because I talked about how I was notorious. Good morning, Miss Danielle. How I was notorious, or used to be notorious for, no matter what my house looked like. Good morning, Miss Carla. If people showed up, especially unexpectedly, or even expectedly, I know that's not really a word, that I would always immediately apologize for the state of my home. And so that got me thinking, and that kind of sat and stewed, and I was actually leaning towards a different topic, and this one kind of just shot its way to the surface and said, here I am. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm sorry. We're going to talk about apologies, when they are strengths and when they are weaknesses, but more specifically, why are they so important? So when are they a strength? If raise your hand if you're not afraid to say that you apologize all the time or too much. Because I have been there, and I'm still, every once in a while I do what we call reverting to training, and I forget myself, or I'm having a weak moment where I'm feeling a little less than, and I find myself apologizing for things that have absolutely nothing to do with me. So why are apologies important? When are apologies a strength? Apologies are a strength and are important when you give a sincere apology. When you give a sincere apology, you are taking personal responsibility. Personal responsibility is a huge thing for me. I wrote an entire paper on it during my bachelor's study that I think about often, and kind of wish that I would have pursued having published, because I think we could have used it then and we could use it now. In any case, when you give a sincere apology, you are taking personal responsibility for your part. And I'm going to emphasize the word part, because we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. For your part in something negative that someone else is feeling or experiencing. Apologies can repair and heal relationships when they are in fact sincere and you are taking personal accountability for your part. when you apologize, you are demonstrating and understanding that hurtful behavior is not okay. And by recognizing that and acknowledging it and apologizing for it, you are making others feel safe. It also can reestablish dignity for the person who has been harmed. And sometimes for you too, to be honest with you. It depends on how you approach the apology. And it also increases self-awareness. So apologies can be super important and super beneficial, and definitely a strength. When is apologizing a good idea? Well, when you've hurt or insulted someone. Now, if you've done it on purpose, you may not feel the need to apologize, but sometimes we hurt or insult people unintentionally, and apologizing to them for that is not necessarily a bad thing. I know situations where maybe I've hurt someone else or someone else has hurt me, or both have happened at the same time, because rarely ever are we just, unless we're just in a mean place, rarely ever are we just randomly hurting people for no reason. Usually there is some kind of a back and forth going. There's some kind of a hurt followed by retaliation type dynamic. So it's a good idea to apologize when you've hurt or insulted someone. Again, if you've done it intentionally, apologies can seem a little shallow, and we'll get there in a minute. You can apologize when you've been disrespectful. I don't know a whole lot of people who are disrespectful intentionally. They're often not aware that they're doing it. But then once it becomes apparent that they've hurt someone, they can be, depending on the person. Good morning, Miss Darian. They can be good at apologizing for being disrespectful. If you've been judgmental, judged someone unfairly or harshly, or jumped to assumptions based on something shallow or surface, that is a good time to apologize. If you know and you recognize that you've engaged in wrongful behavior towards someone. When I was a kid, I had learned, my stepfather taught me how to do some karate punches. And I was bullied a lot, so I was pretty much angry at everybody. And this young man who had a crush on me at the time, and you know how we are as kids, the ones we want to have crushes on us are not the ones we have crushes on. So it's silly kid stuff. But he walked up. I was frequently called a dog when I was a child. I was called a dog by most of the boys around me on the playground. And there was frequent barking and things like that. And this poor young man, he called me Dollface, because he had a bit of a crush on me, but he annoyed me. He annoyed the crap out of me, at the time. And I'm smiling because it's funny to me now, the way these things look when we get older and when we grow. In any case, he walked up, he said something to me, and he said Dollface, and I thought he said Dogface. And I let fly my very first, very solid karate punch in the gut. And he was doubled over on the ground. It was kind of ugly. And I may have apologized to him at some point later when I understood what he really intended to say. And I was pretty young at the time. Again, we're talking, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that vicinity. But I'm sure I apologized later when I found out what he really did say. But that was a terrible thing. So again, if you've engaged in wrongful behavior, most of the time it's not intentional. For some people it is intentional, and for that type of person, it may not actually, apologies may not ever happen. But the point is that a great time to apologize is when you've engaged in wrongful behavior. And then, of course, when you failed to keep a promise, and that can be very, very difficult. So speaking of difficult, why is apologizing so hard? Well, oftentimes because we, the apologizer, is that a word? We, the apologizer, have a weak sense of self, or we feel a need to protect ourselves, or an avoidance of responsibility that makes it difficult. We're trying to avoid responsibility. We don't necessarily want to take accountability for our part in it because they did this first, so therefore that's why we did this. So it's their fault that we behaved wrongfully or hurt them. So a weak sense of self or a need to protect ourselves or a need to avoid responsibility for whatever the case may be, is a good example of when apologizing can be very difficult. I have a story, but I'm not sure it's time yet. Apologizing also is often equated to guilt for you and absolution for the other person. So this is a big one because a lot of times in those situations where people are going back and forth, they're hurting, they're retaliating, whatever, we believe that if we apologize, that we are giving the other person absolution and we are taking on the entire blame for the situation ourselves, which is not necessarily the right way to look at it. We can, in a situation like that where two people are just kind of going at it and words are being exchanged because other words were already said, and you get to the point where you've lost track of where it started or why it started, and you're just screaming at each other or trading insults or barbs or whatever. It can be easy to assume that if you apologize, you are taking responsibility for the whole exchange. And so this is when apologizing can be very hard, but apologizing for your part in it does not have to mean that you are absolving them of theirs. It also doesn't look like, well, I'm sorry for this, but you need to apologize for that. It doesn't look like that either, if that makes sense. This can be a very slippery slope. So sometimes it also calls attention to a mistake that may have gone unnoticed or that you were hoping went unnoticed. So there's a little story here about once upon a time where I accidentally sent a text message that was intended for somebody close to me in a private conversation. Don't worry, it wasn't dirty or anything like that. It was just maybe not very nice. And it actually went to the person or people it was about instead of where it was supposed to go. And it was a horrifying experience. And I really, really felt bad because even though that was the way I felt, I would have never intentionally put that out there except in an appropriate conversation with that person. Does that make sense? So I was absolutely, texting can really get us in trouble, y'all. That's a conversation for a whole other day. But I really felt awful, and I talked a little bit about apologizing, and it was actually a group message. So a few people kind of jumped in and were like, oh, and kind of made a joke about it. But even now, to this day, I still feel like it's something I owe an apology for if the situation and if the situation were appropriate and I could do so in person, because obviously by text is not where I would want it to go at this point. So the question is, how many of the people in that group saw that text and took it personally? So sometimes by apologizing, I could call more attention to something that maybe not everybody noticed or not everybody cared about. Do I still feel a strong need to apologize? Abso-freaking-lutely. It's something that's on my mind almost every day. But I also understand that because of the context and because of the situation that it may be better addressed when it comes up face to face, if that makes sense. So sometimes it can call attention to a mistake that may have gone unnoticed. And that's when it really boils down to taking accountability for your actions. One of the things that I prided myself in the most in my career, that I recently retired from so that I could go to grad school and not really be retired, was that if I made a mistake, I owned it. I pointed out, I sometimes joke that I would shout from the rooftops and say, I did this wrong and I'm sorry, but I also will never do it again because I've learned my lesson. So, sometimes, even if it calls to a mistake that maybe somebody else didn't know about, sometimes apologizing can be very much a strength when it's showing your transparency and demonstrating your integrity. And also, sometimes that's just out of fear because you would rather call attention to it now than worry that somebody's going to discover it later and that you acted like nothing was going on, right? A real apology, though, is more than I'm sorry, and this is why some people struggle with it, because it is more than those two words. A sincere apology includes new or changed behavior. It includes saying I'm sorry and addressing the issue and making sure that you don't do that again. And that is why sometimes it's difficult for people to apologize, because they're not looking forward to what happens beyond those words, I'm sorry. Sometimes people don't apologize or have a difficult time apologizing because it's a personality thing or a mental health disorder, and they lack empathy and they have difficult seeing anything from someone else's perspective. So in their minds, they're always right and the other people are always wrong. And in those kind of cases, you will rarely, if ever, hear an apology. And if you do, it probably doesn't include that changed behavior. It is probably two words that they threw out there to kind of smooth things over that wasn't really genuine. And I'm sure that we all have encountered at least one person like that. And then, of course, there's good old-fashioned pride, which comes into play in all of these things, except maybe the difficulty in seeing each other from another perspective, because no human being is usually okay with admitting they're wrong. And if they are okay with admitting they're wrong, then it's usually because they think they're wrong all the time. And that's a whole other situation. So those are the reasons why the major reasons why apologizing can often be very difficult. So when is apologizing a weakness? We're going to talk about that, that taking responsibility all the time. When apologizing is a weakness is when someone apologizes too much. You can choose to or not to raise your hand. If you are guilty of this, I know that I am. There are often reasons behind that. Those reasons look something like craving social acceptance or people pleasing. So as a child, as I've mentioned in previous and even today, I was bullied. I was picked on a lot. I had a volatile relationship at home. And I struggled a lot in a lot of ways. I had a very low self-esteem. I frequently felt like I was a burden, like I was asking too much, like I was taking up too much space. Eric and I have talked about that before. Even after we moved in together, I struggled. I was, not that you would know it now, because now my shoes are creeping out of my closet, down the hallway, and headed out the door. But I struggled very often when I was staying in anyone's home, even when I was in foster care, to unpack, to spread out very much. If I'm a guest in somebody's house, I'm usually keeping myself pretty like to one corner, all my things. I'm living out of the bag. I don't even get into drawers in a hotel room. I'm just that way. And a lot of times that's related to craving social acceptance or not wanting to be a burden or truly believing that we are a burden. And that's where apologizing can become very, very rampant. Carla, love your courage, and your transparency. So that's when we find ourselves apologizing for everything, like literally everything. This can also often be a trauma or distress response. If you've suffered abuse, emotional, physical, mental, abuse is abuse, y'all. Sexual abuse. Those of us that have experienced those kind of traumas and have that PTSD, we have a tendency to try to be as non-confrontational as possible, to try to fly under the radar. We tend to, like I said, just make ourselves small and try to be unobtrusive. And as a result, one of the things that frequently comes out is I'm sorry, because we truly feel like we are a burden, like we are in someone's way, that we are taking up too much space, whatever the case may be. So that is when apologizing can be a weakness, because what's happening is it's a knee-jerk, visceral response that we are giving because we are assuming that we are a problem. And so that signals low self-esteem. We're craving social acceptance. We're in a people-pleasing state, so we're apologizing because we want people to like us. And obviously, based on my example from my childhood, you could see where that would have definitely set the stage for me to be that apologizer. Guilt. Guilt is a big thing behind apologizing. Sometimes we are experiencing real guilt over something we've done, like the text I talked about. So sometimes that guilt comes out in the form of a constant apology. Sometimes it's false guilt, that we just assume that we're guilty, or as I said before, that we assume that we are a problem, that we're in somebody's way or being disruptive or whatever. And so we're constantly apologizing for it. And then there's the times that somebody else has wronged someone and we know they have, and we apologize for them consistently because that person may be of that personality that's never going to apologize for themselves. So we feel the need to apologize on their behalf and take that responsibility on ourselves. And I know that I have been guilty of doing that sometimes. And there may be moments where it's appropriate. I have like 18 examples bouncing through my head and none of them are coming to the surface right now. So we're going to leave that alone. Another reason, and this is going to be hard to swallow. And I know it's going to be hard to swallow because it was hard for me to swallow. Some of that apologizing and people pleasing comes from a place of self-centeredness. Now, you might be sitting here thinking, are you freaking kidding me? You're telling me that because I'm apologizing all the time and because I'm assuming that I'm in somebody's way or taking up space that I'm self-centered? Yes, you can be self-centered without having a low self-esteem. Self-centeredness doesn't always look like, hey, look at me. It's not always what it's about. So after my divorce, when I was kind of trying to recover from my divorce and first discovering or actually had a name for my anxiety and depression that had been with me since long before the marriage, just for the record, a book was recommended to me called Happiness is a Choice. Carla, you say, yikes, like you're a little worried about what's coming. And I read this book, and as I started reading this, the book is fabulous. It's been updated since then. I will drop a link for the book in the comments. I had a copy. I think I passed it on to a loved one because I had one of the newer copies. It's called Happiness is a Choice. And as I was reading this book, it was like my first self-help book, y'all. And as I was reading it, it was just the right time for that book in my brain. You know what I mean? How I've said that sometimes you can hear something 18 billion times over, and it's not until that 18 billion and one that the light bulb goes on, right? So in this case, I was ready for this book and what it had to say. And as I'm reading the book, I'm like, oh, that's my ex-husband. Oh, that's my ex-boyfriend. And I'm finding all the people around me in this book as they talk about these different things. And then there was a part in the book that said that basically, and I'm paraphrasing because it's been years since I've actually read it, so I don't have it verbatim anyway. Then there's this area where they talk about when you assume that someone else is upset because of you. That's self-centeredness. So I had a lot of that experience. I had a lot of, in my job, if somebody walked in the door, if a member walked in the door and they were upset, I assumed they were mad at me. I was always assuming that I did something wrong, that I was in the way, that I was the reason somebody wasn't smiling today. Never the good stuff, always the bad stuff. So when you hear that and when you think about that or when you've experienced that, you're thinking to yourself, this is a humble person. This is someone who doesn't believe they have any worth. How can that be self-centered? Well, it is self-centered when you assume that whatever's going on with somebody else has something to do with you. It's kind of a sneak attack, isn't it? And I was floored and I was angry and I was like, what do you mean I'm not self-centered? And I couldn't deny what I just read and how it made me feel and the way it described the way I was. And that was the beginning of change for me. It truly was, because even though I had no self-esteem, it was in the toilet. I didn't think I was worthy of most people's attention, compliments, whatever. The fact was that I assumed that everything negative happening around me, with anybody around me, that it had something to do with me. And that was a huge light bulb, y'all. So when I find myself in that place again, and it still happens, because remember, recovery, not recovered. It happens that I will find myself, I know I'm in trouble if I'm having one of those days where I'm just like, well, so-and-so didn't even smile today, so I wonder what the hell I did to them. See where I'm going with that? So that's where that apologizing can come from. It can come from a place of self-centeredness because you are assuming that whatever's going on over there or up there, that's a little Jeff Dunham reference if you're not familiar, is because of you. Then you might have to examine yourself a little bit. So I'll drop the link to that book in the comments when I'm done.
Also, apologizing, excessive apologizing can actually be related to a mental health condition, which often comes out of some of these other things I've talked about, which is the trauma, the low self-esteem, the craving social acceptance. A lot of times these are in fact centered around some type of trauma, abuse, as children, low self-esteem, but they can be because of a mental health condition that has either developed because of that or was the underlying cause, such as depression and anxiety, PTSD, and even some types of OCD. But we have some tips. I have some tips for replacement behavior. So if you are that person who's constantly apologizing for even the littlest of things that may not have even been under your control, here's some replacement statements from Psych Central. If you're saying, I'm sorry, I'm late, try, this is where the gratitude becomes really important. Try, thank you for your patience with me getting here. Instead of, I'm sorry, can I ask a favor? How many of us want to ask somebody a favor and start out with an apology? It's like the person already knows something's going on, right? We're setting up a flag. Instead of, I'm sorry, can I ask a favor? Thank you for being willing to help. Would you be willing to help? Instead of, sorry, I can't come, how about thank you for inviting me? I can't make it. Start with thanks instead of apologies in this case, because again, in these cases, apologizing could actually be a weakness. Instead of, I'm sorry, am I bugging you? How many of us have asked that question? Or it said, okay, I'm sorry to bother you. Instead of, I'm sorry, am I bugging you? Thank you for your patience with XYZ. Especially if the thing is out of your control or out of their control. Thank you for your patience with XYZ. I'm sorry to bother you. Thank you for your time. I'm sorry I forgot. Thank you for reminding me. I'm sorry I'm so bad at this. Thank you for helping me. I'm sorry my house is a mess. This is my own. How about welcome? Come on in. Just not everything needs an apology. And as I said, if this is something that you're experiencing where you're apologizing all the time for things that have nothing to do with you, things that have everything to do with you and everything in between, then maybe it's time to change the language and reframe the thought a little bit. So, that is, and again, remember that just like anything else, it can lose meaning and sincerity when you do it too much. So if and I'm guilty. I have friends, and I'm guilty even though I've been there, who I've gotten to the point now when somebody's apologizing to me for something that has absolutely nothing to do with them, I will look right at them and go, why are you apologizing? I actually question it. And it's because I understand what it's like and I want them to see that it's something, and I will often follow with an I appreciate your apology. But why are you apologizing? It's not your fault. Because I want them to see that they don't have to take responsibility for the whole world. I had a psychology teacher in high school. We took a full year of psychology and sociology. It was one semester of each. And we were working on a project, and I will never forget this. I will remember this man as long as I am alive, because he saw what was happening with me, even as a teenager, long before I did. So we were doing this thing, and you remember the old school projectors where if you wanted to trace something or you wanted to make something bigger, you use the projection thing. There was a name for it. I can't remember what it was, but it was a true overhead projector, okay? And you'd put the thing on it, and it would transfer the image onto the wall and make it bigger so that you could do whatever you wanted with it. And we were working on some kind of a project, and I was standing on the wall, and this is appropriate because Easter just passed, okay? So some of you are really going to get this. And I'm going to try to get through the story without crying because it still affects me today. So I'm over at the wall, and I'm like, we need to make it this big. Do you see where I'm going with this? And I'm like this on the wall. And Mr. Chowick, that was his name, he stopped me, and he said, Donna, stand right there. He said, and turn around. So I was like this. He said, don't move. I started to put my arms. He said, no, leave your arms there. Turn around. So I turned around like this. Do you see where I'm going with this? I had totally forgotten about this for a bit here. So, and he said, and I did not understand it at the time. I did not understand what the hell he was talking about. I have reflected on this moment so many times because I truly understand. He said, you are not responsible for the world. He saw, I truly believe that man saw what was happening in me, my anxiety, my depression, all of that, long before I ever hit that point of even knowing it was a thing. It was very profound for me. But again, so back to the apologizing, but you see the point there. We often, when we are over apologizing or apologizing all the time, we're taking responsibility for the world. We're taking responsibility for things that are not our responsibility. And that is when apologizing can truly become a weakness, because it undermines any kind of confidence we might have. And it kind of displays to everyone that we don't have it. And we think we're doing good. We think we're doing great. But if we're apologizing for things that are under our control, or long beyond our control, and we're doing it too much, it can lose sincerity. It can become too frequent and lose its meaning. So how do we best apologize? I'm going to start wrapping this up because I know your time is important. How to best apologize. The best apology is acknowledgement of what you've done wrong, expressing remorse for it, and changing behavior or making amends. Apologizing for your portion in an event doesn't have to absolve the other person. It's for you as much as it's for them. Remember that. And some other things to remember. The best apology is changed behavior. I believe that. I never always understood it when I heard that quote, but it's very huge for me now. And my daughter is trying to teach my grandson that now, so that, because as kids, we just tell kids, say, I'm sorry. If you did something wrong, say, I'm sorry. But we don't necessarily, because we think they're too young or whatever, we don't necessarily impress upon them the importance of why they should be sorry or what they did wrong. So sometimes kids grow up, until they learn for themselves, they grow up thinking that they just spit it out. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And they don't really understand the meaning. So my daughter, God bless her, is trying to teach my grandson that the best behavior, or the best apology, is changed behavior. And he gets it. He's starting to get it. So keep that in mind. Another thing to remember, apologies are not an opportunity to make excuses or qualify your behavior. Like my little example earlier where I'm like, well, I'm sorry, but I did that because you did this. Apologies are not intended to be accusations, or start a whole new circle of trading barbs, insults, whatever. Apologize for your portion. It's not to be used as an opportunity to point out somebody else's faults. So with that said, also skip the but. I'm sorry, but usually means you're about to qualify that behavior. There may be a perfectly good explanation for why you behaved the way you did. It's not always appropriate in the moment of apology to discuss it. It might be appropriate to discuss it at a later date in a more neutral setting when everybody's calmed down and the relationship is repaired a little bit. Sometimes there's an opportunity to revisit that. But your apology does not always require an explanation in the moment. It can degrade at the integrity of the apology. Pause before reacting. Whatever it is, before those words come out of your mouth, and this is going to take some practice, because if you're like me, it may be something that just automatically comes out. It may actually be a habit to say, I'm sorry. Pause before reacting. Ask yourself if you really did anything wrong. If the situation really requires an apology. I know that's a big deal. And then here's the most important thing. Let it go. Sometimes we apologize for something, and then we keep going back, and we keep hitting our head against that wall, and we keep bringing it back up and re-apologizing. And sometimes other people are unkind, and even after we've taken responsibility and after we've apologized, they keep throwing it back in our face. So whether you are the apologizer or the apologizee, and again, I'm not sure either one of those are words, but those are Donna's words for the day. Either way, once the apology is done and accepted and it's done its job, if it has done its job to repair or smooth things over or whatever, if the apology was done with integrity, whether it was to you or from you, let it go. If there is an opportunity to discuss the whys at a later date in a non-threatening, non-harmful fashion, fantastic. But we sometimes, in the process of over apologizing, keep throwing stuff back out there. We keep regurgitating it in order to apologize again. So once you've done that, letting it go and moving on and forgiving yourself as much as the other person may have already forgiven you is the crucial step here. So that is all I have for you today. And I guess I'm not really running too long because I was already running late when I got on. But I hope you found that helpful. I hope that illuminated some things about apologies for you that you may or may not have known. As you know, a lot of these things are designed for a more for more general and not too much digging. Sometimes we do dig in, and this is a place where we could probably take each section I talked about and dig in for hours later. But I hope you found it helpful, and if you found it helpful, please share. And don't forget that if there's somebody specific that you think should see it and you don't want to tag them in it, you can actually share this video to their messenger, and nobody has to know but them and you. Okay? Even I won't know because it won't show me. So I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please share. Let me know if you have questions or comments. I'm going to drop a link for that book, Happiness is a Choice, in the comments. And as always, if you have suggestions for topics you'd like me to see, like to see me cover later, shoot me a message, drop a comment. I stay away from politics. I stay away from negativity. And I try to kind of stay pretty general on religion too. Although I do profess my faith fairly regularly, like I did with my example from Mr. Choick's psychology class. In any case, if you have an idea of something you'd like to see me cover, I love to learn. I love to research. Please feel free to message me, drop a comment or whatever, and I'll see if I can work it into a future Wellness Wednesday. In the meantime, have a fabulous week and a fabulous Wednesday. I will see you next week, and be well. Bye.